This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. New Society Publishers is your gateway to a regenerative future. They're not just about books, they're about transforming lives and communities through the power of knowledge and action. Their mission is simple: to inspire and empower individuals to create a more just, sustainable, and compassionate world. They envision a future where every person has the tools and resources they need to thrive in harmony with nature, where communities are resilient and interconnected, and where equity and justice are fundamental principles guiding our collective journey. If you subscribe right now to their newsletter at newsociety.com, you'll be the first to receive sneak peeks at new content and get discounts on upcoming title releases. You'll even get an exclusive discount code on your first purchase of books, ebooks, or audiobooks. So sign up today at newsociety.com. Hey, well, welcome back, Alex. I'm really glad that we got another interview. I'm really excited to hear this one. Now, I was able to interview Bobby, who is one of our beloved contributors on the Discord server and wonderful source of sense of humor there that I really appreciate. He was on our panel episode where we talked about small-scale operations, along with a couple of other Discord participators recently. And I, from that brief interview, could see that it would be worth getting him back for a full interview. So I'm really glad that you were able to do that. Why don't you tell us a bit about how this went?
Yeah, I had a great conversation with Bobby. We connected a lot on both living in these middle income contexts where you have to figure out how to adapt for your local economy, local communities, what people are interested in. He's from Bulgaria. I'm living in Uruguay, and we really connected on that. And I think one of the things that attracted me to interviewing him was that we kind of compared experiences on the Discord channel before. And so it was really exciting to talk with him. It was a good interview. It was funny because a lot of what he was focusing on is kind of his role in building community in order to create a regenerative landscape and kind of bring back access to rural knowledge was kind of skipped a generation in Bulgaria because of that context. And it was interesting that the first time we tried to schedule the interview, he had to cancel because he was doing one of those community things. A fire had happened at the energy generator or the conversion station in his village. And so he had to be on the fire crew to put it out. And so when we rescheduled, it was, again, had a moment of disruption where his neighbor delivered eggs to him from the thing. So you could see he's living that regenerative community building in practice. And it was really interesting to talk to him about that approach.
That's something I've always admired about his story, because he has a blog that he's shared on the Discord a couple of times and has spoken a lot in the conversations from his memories of growing up and the skills and the knowledge that his grandparents had, and how so much of that, you said, was lost in a generation during the communist occupation in Bulgaria. And his attempt to bring that back from an earlier vision of having, the permaculture dream property and getting a ton of acreage somewhere and living off the grid and all of this, and realizing that he could do so much more in a more suburban area outside of Sofia and the capital there. And I mean, he's just such a reference, I think, to many of us in the conversations in the Discord of what someone can do with a small land base, but a heavy community presence, and really generously offering guidance, support, skills, tools, the whole thing for others, not in a way that pushes them to change, but gives inspiration when their kids come over to play at his place and they're able to share preserves or recipes and all of these things. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, and it was a great conversation for me because I'm still often very focused on what do I need to technically do with my landscape, and that reminder, oh yeah, I also need to do the extra work to build community. And we've As someone who moved to a different country, I don't come with that community, right? And so you have to be intentional about building it. And so it's very interesting to talk to him about that approach. And I'm really excited. I hope the listeners appreciate it. And I want to apologize ahead of time for my bad mic setup for this one. Normally, I don't have these problems, and we're going to fix it for future episodes.
No worries. And luckily, I was able to clean it up and it's not hard to hear you. But yes, I look forward to you getting a new microphone. I'm really looking forward to this episode, which I haven't listened to yet, I'll be honest, because community building is something that I realize is essential if we're going to have a real discussion about self-sufficiency, and that there's no self-sufficiency without community connections. And that as much as I advocate it, it's one of the things that I do most poorly. I'll be honest, I'm an introverted person. I struggle to get out and make connections in my local community, and I'm really looking forward to his advice and his experience in this conversation. So let's hand it over to Bobby.
Hi, it's Alex, and I'm really excited to get a chance to talk to Bobby, who's been on the Discord channel since I've joined the Regenerative Skills Discord channel at the beginning a couple of years ago, and I'm really excited to just get a chance to actually get to know him. We've had quite a lot of back and forth on the Discord channel about how living in two different middle-income countries, me in Uruguay and Bobby in a former Soviet bloc country, have very similar experiences of kind of trying to do regenerative practices in that context. So I'm really excited. And Bobby, why don't you introduce yourself? What should we know about you?
Alex, I'm glad to be back on the podcast. I'm a nearly 50-year-old male from Bulgaria. I lived my youth in the communist regime during those days. And currently I'm living with my family of 5 in a village right outside the capital of Bulgaria, which is the city of Sofia. And my main day-to-day work is graphic design and pre-press and printing, but I have confined that to about 2 or 3 days per week, and the rest of my time is dedicated to nature and connecting people back to it.
Yeah, that's so great. You know, we both have these day jobs, right? Which I work on the computer for Wikimedia. You have the graphic design thing. Why those two parallel kind of parts of life, right? Why are you doing the nature work and the digital work, and what kind of connects the two?
Well, I worked exclusively in the digital media and the printed media for almost 20 years, since my early 20s. But with the passing of time, I more and more began kind of mentally reconnecting with my now late grandparents, which more or less raised me up when I was little in their garden in a village near my hometown. And all of their lessons and my experience as a child kind of bubbled up as I got older, and especially since we got the kids and I got married. We have 3 kids. So all of the little tactile things from which I remember from the garden, they were like under a deep layer of all of the digital world which I was immersed in for like 20 years, but they started to bubble up. And I started to sense more and more that all of the work which I was doing professionally and which was feeding me and my family and building our house in some sense was not enough to keep me happy and to have like a sense of fulfillment. So what I gradually started doing was weaning out or away from the monetary economy, so to speak. And we decided collectively as a family to take the road to degrowth. So we really needed to, me and my wife mostly, but we dragged the kids along with us, to step away from the city and the fixed rat race, the fixed schedules, and work more with our own time and be more available to the people around us and to the cycles of nature. I can't really pinpoint a time in my wife, which this was not like a sudden transition, it was a gradual thing. But once you take on that path, it really lures you in, and it's very hard to go back up slope, as we say currently. And this process in the last 10 or 15 years, which we're working on that, completely changed the way we experience the world around us and the way we live our lives. We are much more at peace, much more content and happy with the lives which we're leading, and kind of isolating or capsulating the digital work, which we still need in some part to get by month to month, allowed us to be more, I don't know how to say this, but be more in tune with our relationship between us and the relationship to all the people around us, which we found out in this process was maybe the most important things in our lives, the community and the connections between people, which we create and foster. I'm not sure I really answered the question, but yeah.
Oh, you did. I'm kind of on that journey as well. Both my partner and I have been doing nonprofit work for 10, 15 years, each of us. And we when we decided that we were staying in Uruguay kind of permanently, we went looking for a farm for that reason, right? We wanted something that was like real and physical and community oriented and had connections to nature that allowed us to do the part. But as you're saying, we still need the day job to pay for the property. I'm wondering for you, like we've often talked on the Discord how like there's quite a difference between what you see people doing in other parts of the world and what you're able to do there in Bulgaria. I'm wondering, how would you set the context? What's particular about your community outside of Sofia and how you kind of made this choice to build community and do these kind of landscape activities in that community?
Right. So if I may, I'll just do a little bit backstory here. When I met my future wife, when we met, we had this common dream of living outside of the city, integrated more in the natural processes. So we kind of dreamt about having this integrated farm with pastured animals on a bigger piece of land with, holistic grazing and all the things which I'm sure that people listening to the podcast will be familiar with grazing animals and broilers and hens and turkeys and goats and etc., etc. And we even kind of started on that path, in that direction, looking for land. I have some relatives in the other part of the country which could help with that. But as the kids were being born, we realized more and more that we needed to have a like-minded community around us, more than the dream of having this enterprise, this farm which would feed us and we will be separate from all the digital work which I was doing. So we decided that when we decided that community was more important, then we started to look for a place where we won't be surrounded only by, pensioners with only people on the last part of their lives, only with babushkas, as we say here, but also have young families, people who have young kids, or other people who can really connect with our stage of life. So we found a place which was like the middle ground. It's not like a suburb to the capital where, the very small yards, very big houses, and no animals and no crops growing, just lawns. But it's not also super isolated to rural. And a lot of people realizing the benefit of living closer to what your grandparents had, especially young families, they move out of the cities, especially the capital, into those like satellite villages around. So our context is mostly working with families in our age group with similar age kids, which, however, are still on the very beginning of their journey back to the nature. So they have very little knowledge or information about all of the plants, the processes, the uses, and how to interact with nature as a whole, even how to perceive it in some cases. So we found out in time that this is perfect because it became apparent to us that probably our most important life mission was to help people connect back to nature and live more harmoniously in that.
And you were saying as we were warming up for the call that a lot of people your age, grew up in cities. What about Bulgaria made a lot of people, live in the city and then want to leave? Why is that a particular to your concept?
Yeah, well, I'll have to at least go a little bit back in time again. Before the Second World War and divide, the Cold War, Bulgaria was mostly a rural country. 95% of the population before World War I and then II was rural. And when the communist regime started manifesting in force, they kind of forced the people out of the villages and into the cities to work in the factories and the new industries and the manufacturing. So there was this point in time in the 50s when people were separated from the land. Also, land was nationalized, so you couldn't really own any land. But at that point in time, only the people of my grandparents' population remembered what it was before that happened. And right after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the regime, they rushed back to the land to kind of resume what they missed all this time. And I was very lucky to be a part of that generation, to witness this change and to have this privilege to grow alongside with my grandparents' garden. Because before they passed away, I got a sense of the life which they had, which I couldn't really witness when they were younger. And this life which they led is like not really romanticized, but it describes almost perfectly what permaculture is trying to do. The integrated garden, the community aspects, all of the permaculture ethics were part of the life of the average Bulgarian villager before World War II. So when the time moved forward, I really started to see how people either didn't know about that because they had no point of reference, or they knew about that but didn't know how to get from the current situation backwards or forward, but back in a sense. And as more and more of our food system was industrialized and the ultra processed foods became more and more common, the value of all of the lost things which were given not a generation ago was getting higher and higher. So all of the things like the farmers market, all of the little producers growing food and selling them on the gray market, essentially, all of those things happened like a grassroots movement here, not organized centrally, but from the bottom up, mainly because the people were looking for something which was missing. And I'm feeling that more and more that especially people of my generation and younger are appreciating what we're trying to bring forward as information and as experience, because the folks of my grandparents' generation are all gone. There's no one older, like a tribe is missing its elders. So there's no one older left to to impart those values and to impart those knowledges and experience to the younger and even to our generation. There are not a lot of people left. And
a lot of the knowledge of the agriculture and landscape then is like attached to this more industrial system that was part of the communist period. And so you're kind of having to rebuild that knowledge, that community, that understanding of what's possible in the landscape. Is that correct?
Yes, more or less, because my parent generation, which were born in the 50s, in the 60s, after the World War, they were all raised under the, the communist doctrine, the industrialized agriculture, like the Green Deal in the United States. Everything must be mechanized, fertilizers, artificial, pesticides sprayed on every occasion, heavier and heavier machinery. It's impossible to work in any other way with the land. It has to be subdued, etc., etc. And it's even to that point that it was thought as impossible by many, many people. I think the general populace thinks that it's impossible to grow the food in any other way. And when we are inviting people here in our garden, on many occasions we've had such reactions. How it's possible for anything to grow in that jungle? Everything is weeds, which is actually edible greens. But if you don't know what you are seeing, it's easy to mistake for weeds. So, yeah, that's it's an interesting time to be alive in, and I think that our work, even if it's very insignificant in the overall scheme of things, is still important to do, because even if some people know and understand what we are thinking and how we are working, it will be a benefit to the whole of the community which we're working in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this connects with how our food is created. I see that all the time with our friends that live in Montevideo. So, my partner and I, we work on the internet and free culture. And often we're talking to people who spent their entire lives on computers in apartments, right? And when they come out to our farm, they're like, "Oh, this is amazing! Like, what a magical space! What a different space!" And that kind of how easy it is. I'm wondering, we're talking about how to. I want to learn about your project. Like, what are you actually doing? In the previous podcast, you talked about having a demonstration garden, planting other people's gardens, kind of showing them how to introduce plants. Like, what is your kind of approach to sharing that knowledge?
Right. So I do a lot of different things, and I have always considered myself jack of all trades and master of none. But I think that the most effective thing which I am practicing in the recent decade is implanting ideas. It's a very, very subtle and maybe a little bit insidious way of making people do creative and, productive things. Because here in Bulgaria and in a lot of Slav countries, people don't really like other people telling them what to do after, like 5 decades of, So the best results are usually obtained when people consider the ideas their own. And the finesse of the work which I do is making people come up with ideas as their own, but actually me planting the seed of the idea, watching it grow into, like a full-blown realization of their own. To be more precise, one of the things which we're doing is educating, especially working via the kids as a vector, people on edible plants of all types, greens and herbs, and especially small fruit and berries, which are the favorite for any kid. But when you have a parent which says that my kids doesn't eat any fruit whatsoever, no peaches, no anything, no strawberries, everything that usually kids like to eat, it won't eat. So we start by gifting them a full-grown red currant bush, and on the next year, the kid is happily munching on that. First they start calling in panic. this thing that which you gave us, it started fruiting. It is poisonous. It is safe to eat. My kid wants to eat it. So yeah, gradually one red currant bush is not enough. Then you go, okay, we have also black currants and white currants and the huscaps and one year, like Saskatoon berries and also raspberries of very many colors and strawberries which give different size and shapes and all through the year. So we're gradually saturating the space with edible fruit and edible plants, using the kids as motivation for them, because most parents want to do what good for the kid. And even when you are comforting a parent that eating a red currant is not poisonous, so the kid won't die, even in that process, you're educating them of the nutritional value, of the fact that they no longer need to buy supplements of vitamins for, tablets for their kids, because they are now eating higher values of those vitamins via the plants which they received as a gift. So that's one of the things which we're doing actively. Also, because we have 3 kids and our garden is a very open space, we don't even have a fence on the yard still. So everyone is coming and going all the time. A lot of the kids of the village spend time here in our yard, in our garden. So they eat a lot of what we are planting. So this is another like a subversive way of getting into people's heads. And I always say that food is the best foot in the door. People which are not convinced, this is the first thing which you can influence someone in some direction. So that's one of the overall things which we are working towards, getting people to know more about edible plants and how to use them, how to grow them, propagate them, etc. We also working in educating people about water management, what to do with the water on their property, how to manage all the runoff if they have any. Another thing which we do is my grafting, let's say, education courses, but it's more like a free form. Whoever wants to come and see how I graft in the spring, all of the pruning which I do, which I start doing for free in the village, just to show people that it's not something dangerous or hard to do. And more people start coming out with questions and experiments, sending me photos. So most of the work which we're doing, I'm talking more about my part, but my wife is also working. I want to mention that really quickly because she's a herbalist and also massage therapist. So she often recommends people herbal medicine, sometimes give them our own preparations. We have our herbal tinctures and mixes with dry herbs, etc. Besides all of the therapeutic massage practice which she has. But each of us works in union towards a common goal, people's health generally, but also accepting more nature into their lives. And all of the other things, such as the tree plantings, which I do each spring and each autumn, all of the village gatherings, which we do at summer solstice and at Christmas and other occasions, all of those kind of revolve around this common topic. And we still are unable to feed ourselves from all of that monetarily, but it completely saturates our social needs, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it keeps you like busy and engaged with the community in a way that it keeps on giving. That sounds like a wonderful experience. When I lived in Vermont, I had a lot of community type experiences like that around, the food system and around, helping people on their properties. I'm wondering, you were talking a little bit before about how, like, being in Bulgaria, sometimes people are looking at their gardens and they're saying, well, this should be a lawn, right? This should be this thing that's like we admire from the US or Europe, like green flat spaces with not a lot in it. And you're talking a lot about how you have to influence at all levels in the community to show them like, yeah, there's other ways to do, green space other than a lawn. But what's kind of your approach to that, and why do you think it's important?
Right. Well, my main approach with most people, which in our immediate community in the village, is I'm working the money angle, because most of the things which I'm promoting to them come free from me because I propagate them. So it's very much easier to sell, air quote, someone something if it doesn't cost anything. And my approach is usually like, take this, it doesn't cost anything. And if it doesn't grow, who cares? It's not an expense. And usually the things which I give, which I propagated, they grow very nicely. So it works very well in that case. But you're absolutely right that people are more and more influenced by what they witness on the social media. And I'm happy that we still don't have like the HOA of the homeowners. We have no such structures here. Luckily, I don't think this could survive in Bulgaria anyway. But even the social pressure is not very high to maintain such perfect manicured spaces. But with people which have higher like aesthetic demands, I don't try to talk them out of that. But usually what I do is just add bits and pieces here and there, usually in the design phase and then in the planting implementation stage of the garden. Or even if they have a already planted garden, there's always space for something more, which can look nicely in aesthetics. It can look like a nice plant and nice part of the overall design, but also be medicinal, edible, or in other ways beneficial to them. And even that simple thing is like a window opening into another world for them, because they usually such people, they consider the garden like a backdrop, like something like a picture which you only observe from a distance and you don't interact with in any way. You have no yields out of it besides maybe pleasing your eye, but no other yields. So now that you have 3 types of mint growing in the garden, or maybe lemon balm, or maybe currants, or maybe some other edible berry bush, now you're compelled, maybe even forced to interact with the garden more, because if you're not picking it, you're missing out on something. And this is a very strong incentive especially for Slav people. We are very well pronounced foragers here, especially on salvage materials, but also in the garden. So that's one of the main vectors of which I influence people. I try to convince them, or maybe not even convince, but suggest that there is more to it than what you already have here.
That when I was interviewing Margarita about a month and a half ago, who also lives here in Uruguay, she said that was a really great way to get native fruits into people's gardens, because they're both very vibrant, like living plants, and they have fruit. And so it gets people a chance to like step out in and say, oh, here's a guava or something else to try. And that sounds like what you're doing a lot of the times, is giving people both beautiful and edible. Yeah.
In that interview of yours, I listened to that podcast, by the way. I was blown away that the fruit and veg stores in Uruguay had very limited like a choice. Like I always pictured Uruguay like this exotic country with guavas and mangoes and everything all over. And then it's like meat and potatoes. What the hell?
Yeah. Uruguay is funny because in a lot of ways, like I was in Poland last year, and a lot of ways the food culture is like Eastern Europe, right? Where it's like it's a lot of meat and potato, it's greens that are like overcooked. And I'm wondering, do you encounter kind of other cultural barriers to getting people to think about their food coming from their garden? Is it like, do people want to eat diversity, or do they have palates that, are interested in it? Or have you just found the right community to kind of share this interest, food interest?
Right. Well, this part will be a little bit darker, but food bills here in Bulgaria are usually a big part of the family's budget. So many things, many times, bluntly put, you don't have enough money to buy a huge diversity and very high quality of produce, even when we're talking about basic vegetables and greens and meat and eggs and milk products, etc. So this is what my teacher in the university, when I had some book illustration courses, he called this a creative constraint, because when you don't have enough money to buy like asparagus or maybe very high quality tomatoes or maybe like this expensive cheese or something, or the high quality butter, which is not palm oil and some poisonous other things in it, when you don't have the money to buy that, maybe there is other way to obtain it, not by directly paying for it, but in any other ways. So gardening is, and also the village community which we're trying to foster here, is a great way to do that. And I'll give a very quick example, if I may, with the cow's milk. We have a lady here living very close by with just a few cows, and she sells all of the extra milk to the villagers. So it doesn't get to travel more than a few houses, because she doesn't have like tons of milk out of a few cows. So it's ultra local. Her cows are only pastured, so no input of external feed into the system, only what the pastures around the village afford. Then you're getting milk which is otherwise impossible to buy in such fresh and high quality, even if you have a lot of money from the shop. From that milk, you're getting butter. The quality of the butter which you're getting, which we're making in our home, rivals the French gourmet butter, which is like 40 euro a kilo, which is unthinkable prices for butter here in Bulgaria. You're also getting yogurt with no thickeners, with no guar, gum, and other preservatives added. The natural thing, which is also, you can consider it organic, because there's nothing chemical in the process of making it. You're making it yourself. Plus, it's made with the bacteria, which is the part of the biome of your home, of your garden, of the air you're breathing. So it's also very beneficial for your own personal biome, the gut biome. So you're basically stacking up benefit after benefit, only because you're purchasing the cow's milk from the lady next door, which also comes cheaper than the milk which you can get from the store, and it has no other benefits. So the money angle, so to speak, the fact that people don't really have enough money to afford the best quality, is a very, very important part. And I think in many countries which are lower income, this will always be very, very important for people. The fact that you can grow better quality food that which you can afford to buy otherwise from the shops.
Yeah, it's very funny. I'm often gifting my zucchini and chard and things that I'm producing too much of to my neighbors who've lived on farms their entire lives. One neighbor does squash and peppers commercially, right, and he's had 60 years on the property, and I'm giving him stuff he's never tried before. And then he's like, "Oh, can I plant this? like, can I do it now?"
Yes, you allow.
And I think it's really funny how the constraints of kind of the financial market for food kind of pushes, especially in these like middle and lower income communities, kind of pushes people in directions that they might not have gone otherwise.
Right.
Does the town have like a market, or are like a fair, or is it mostly just like a small trade that's going on inside the?
Well, The capital has many farmers market with people coming from from the nearby region, but that has always been a function of the city, even since before the medieval age, because the production flow to the city center, where the people working in trades in the center can purchase and eat anything. And it's usually a benefit of the higher income people which work in the city, high pair, goddamn. You have some higher paying jobs, but yeah, outside of the city, in the villages, they are not really such like defined markets. It's usually uh, people who buy stuff from their neighbors. Of course, this is all great market, but counter economics, as we say here. But this is how the system works. So all the eggs which we don't produce, the milk products, maybe the meat, our neighbors grow pigs. Of course, none of that is like licensed. So I think that this is the best way to function, because you're not going through any of the regulatory agency requirements. So, and we are still not, as they say in Europe, civilized enough to enforce those things strictly. So you can kind of run between the raindrops, as we say here.
Well, and I think we connected, on the Discord. I think it was about a year ago when I was getting my retention pond excavated by someone who was operating a tractor kind of off grid, right? And he flipped the tractor, and he had his friends come over from the municipality to pull it back and right the tractor again. And you and I connected, like, this is kind of what it's like in these markets and these environments where there's a lot of attempt at bureaucracy or structure, but not always the enforcement. Like there's still that need to like solve problems creatively. I'm wondering, like, what other kind of creative solutions are you seeing happen that, because of these creative constraints, that allow people to do more regenerative things or to work better as communities on these like food system or landscape projects?
Well, one of the things, at least here, which work in an interesting way, is the fact that the lack of cheap and quality materials is forcing people to adapt and improvise all the time. So basically, you have to either be very wealthy to afford yourself to buy quality material. I just want to sidestep here for a minute, because I recently saw the chestnut beams which Oliver is using to restore his house. I mean, dude, this would cost a fortune here to have such size beams, wooden beams, to be able to, do a building project. You have to be basically a millionaire to do that here in Bulgaria. So most of the people are usually, I forgot the term for that, but they're like making ends meet with whatever's available. But that usually requires you to be more creative, because you can't just buy some plans out of a web page and implement those, because you don't have the money or the quality materials which they require. So many projects around the homestead, around the yard, etc., are made from scrap materials, or you have to improvise much more, and that process inherently makes you more adaptive to changing conditions, to lack of materials, etc. And it was very interesting, because when the COVID crisis struck, the city people, that is still a question which bothers me to the day. They flock to the shops not to buy food, but they flock to buy toilet paper. So I was wondering, why do you need toilet paper if you don't have anything to eat? That's a bit controversial. So nobody in the village was caring about toilet paper. They wanted bags of rice and beans and flour and, potatoes. Why do you need toilet paper? So I'm usually amazed how when you're not working into that, when you're surrounded by environment which someone else take care of, someone else creates your environment, someone else cooks your food, someone else take care of everything for you, you kind of, your ability to creatively think and improvise and interact with your environment, it degrades rapidly. I mean, I think this is one of the main problems with the so-called modern society. And if I may share this, I recently listened to a podcast interview with Trevor Noah. It's a comedian, but also a host from some American TV show. So the dude was talking about how there's a paradox, how the more advanced the society or the country is considered to be, the more you are removed from the community, which otherwise sustains your day-to-day life. And it's about how now you have to pay for people to come and build your house, for people to come and clean the house, for people to come and take care of your kids, for people to cook your food, for someone else to produce the food. So basically using the money like an abstraction layer to abstract yourself from the community, which otherwise provides those services for free. Plus, it has the added benefit of having close friends and social support and people to share with, etc., etc. So
that's something I've just noticed here in Uruguay, because a lot of people still have deep connections to rural communities. It's a small population in a big country. But a lot of folks have like a deeper friend network. They have closer relationships. But they know what it means to work in community and solve problems collectively. And we canceled our first recording of this podcast because you were called up for the fire brigade. I wonder, what does it feel like? Do we need to pause for a moment?
Yeah, could you let me just show. The neighbor is bringing some eggs. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Вот, скажи мне, voice. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll edit out this part.
Yeah. But yeah, this is a close friend of mine which has some spare eggs, and we have eggs, but I have my brother and my father. They requested some if I can manage, and he called today. It's a very nice service because home delivery, man.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just 1 minute.
Are you okay?
I'm sorry. Let me just go to the door because now he doesn't want me to pay him. It's always complicated.
I mean, egg always someone needs to pay
Yeah,
for.
it's a currency, man. Like, super. Много ти благодаря. Чао. Dude, it's the hardest with my next door neighbor, a babushka, which has some sheep, and she doesn't want anything. She doesn't want to deal with money in any way, and she brings sheep's cheese, which is very rare and expensive product here, like sheep feta. But she looks from the next door to see when we're in the garden, but no one is in the house, and she opens the front door because we don't lock, and she leaves it on the steps on the house inside and runs away. And then we have to send our daughter with money to go to her house and see when she's not in there and leave money on the table. It's a very nice exchange. Okay, I apologize about that, but yeah, it's a part of life.
I wish I could get sheep or goat cheese. None of my neighbors have sheep or goats. Okay, we're going to restart, and I'm going to restart.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so it was funny. We just had an interruption because of your neighbor bringing you eggs. And I'm wondering, I'm seeing in, Uruguayan society, because a lot of people come from rural communities. They've lived in these kind of, more distributed areas. They know what it feels like, though, doing what they call it. here, which is like a work party to like help people plant trees or build a house or do something.
Right.
And we canceled our first recording of the podcast because you were called up for the fire brigade. I'm wondering, like, what other kinds of examples do you see of people kind of solving problems through community rather than like having a service or having the structure to do the thing.
Right. Well, I think the first problem in our context, which we have to solve, is make people realize that community solves many problems which are otherwise expensive, hard, or impossible to solve. One of the most important vectors of work in that is, again, using our kids, the kids which grow in the community. I think that maybe a lot of the progress in the humanity as a whole is revolving around the needs of kids and the children which we raise. For example, if you have an emergency and you have to run out of the village, go to a nearby village or go to the city or go to the airport or something which you cannot delay, something urgent, you don't have a system either here or anywhere to quickly teleport a babysitter for your kids to come to your place and take care of them. But in a village, the most normal thing is to just say, I'm leaving. If you need something, go to the neighbor. We're leaving our 3 kids at home alone. But when I say alone, they're not like locked into this confined space. They're never alone. They can go to maybe a dozen houses around, and in Bulgaria, houses are very close together because the village structures in such a way, but this is another conversation. But they can go like in a dozen houses, and everywhere they will be taken care of if someone is hurt. They will be entertained, usually by other kids or adults, so they have access to this very diverse group of age people. They will also be fed if they're hungry. So all of their needs will be taken and no questions will be asked. Where were you? Why do I have to take care of your kids? So even such a simple example, this could lift a massive burden from the parents. And I didn't really, of course, I knew from a very young age the saying that it takes a village to raise a child, but only when we had kids in good number and then we lived in the village, we realized the importance and the weight of that saying. And this is one of the many things that the community can solve, which cannot be easily solved by quickly or even at all by money. But the problem which we are facing is that we have to first convince people that community has value, because even younger people younger than our generation, which were born in the 90s especially, they almost have zero of that sense of that experience of community, of people taking care of each other. They were raised in much more individualistic fashion, so it's a novelty to them. And every time we talk to people, we have people as guests at home, or when we're visiting, we're trying to impress on them that people interacting with each other and helping each other has bigger value that any amount of money can provide. Price and value being very different things, especially when it comes to people relations. So when you start valuing those connections more and putting more value in the community and the interactions between people, then the money become no object. I mean, you see that it's not possible you can't buy my friendship and you can't buy your place on my table. I can invite you, of course, but no amount of money will secure that if you're not, part of the community.
Yeah, and it sounds like the village kind of infrastructure in Bulgaria kind of promotes that. There's actually these traditions of kind of collaboration that are really rich. I think one thing I've noticed here in Uruguay is because the agriculture has taken on kind of the direction of North America, right? The farms are a little bit more spread out. There's less of a village, or there is a sense of community, but it's through like different networks, right? It's either through family or very deliberate, intentional work. Like there's these communities of, we call them Uruguayan hippies on the coast, who've like built that around schools or
Right.
built eco construction or these other kinds of things, like very intentional little enclaves rather than the standard. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to hear you say that. But, on the Discord, you're often talking about other kind of community projects as well, like restoring wetlands and doing community stuff. What kinds of like projects get other people that sense in the when you're talking to other people in the
Well, one of the most important things which we started working with in the last 3 years is restoring springs, where spring water, because in Bulgaria, I'm thinking all of Europe, but especially Eastern Europe, there is this pattern. I don't want to say climate change, but I don't know what else it is, where the weather is, our climate on the books when I learned geography, it said it was cool temperate climate. So it must not be very hot, and it has to be rather temperate to be called cool temperate climate. But there's almost nothing temperate about it left, because in the last 10 to 20 years, the weather has been very erratic, and all of our country, and I think most of the Eastern Europe region, has been in a severe drought. The water deficit is massive. Our local river, which had trout swimming some decades ago, it's now dry for 3 months of the year, which is unseen in living memory from the oldest people living in the village. So water has much bigger importance now for the people around. And they start to realize that when we talked the previous week about the transformer fire, when we went to put out the fire, I told you that the pumps will stop working after a couple of hours. And then there's no water in the pipes because there's no power to the pumps. And suddenly natural springs and independent of, the human-built infrastructure, water becomes very important. So people are starting to open their eyes more about that topic, and restoring such spring heads, spring points where the water comes out of the surface naturally becomes more and more interesting. And I'm involved in a couple of such projects. And this is very interesting, but it's very hard to explain without visually showing something. So maybe I'll just mention that we found this spring which was used before our village was created. The people which came here to build the village, they used that spring to build their houses and to raise their animals and their families. So without that spring, there wouldn't be our village. It won't exist. But that that spring was heavily sedimented over during the communist era, because the big tractors, they plowed the perennial pastures upstream of this place. So with the seasonal rains, the sediment fall covered the spring and covered the capture box, the rock structure which captured the spring. So we are now excavating that in order to revive the spring and have a source of clean spring water in our vicinity in case something happens. So I think that's one of the most important projects in our community, even if not a lot of people are still realizing that because of the comfort we have provided by the systems. But
Yeah, the Uruguay went through a really intense drought, climate-induced drought, or climate-made worse drought a couple of years ago, where we no longer had access to water in the pipes. Uruguay had something like 90% population coverage with piped water, right? So it's
Right.
very very good infrastructure. But because the main river ran out of water, basically, they started mixing fresh water with salt water, and everyone was suddenly very aware of how, temperamental and precarious the thing is. I'm wondering, are there other environmental issues like drought and the heat and climate change that are helping make people aware that they need to do something, right? They need to get more involved.
Right. I don't think that the environmental changes alone enough for that process, but I think that it's a very healthy thing that such crises occur, especially in the small scale managed type of development which they happen. Like, we don't have power for 2 days. It's not the end of the world, but you can see how your systems fail or function in such a scenario, or you don't have water in the pipes for a couple of days. What do you do? How do you all manage for that? So I'm very thankful for such, I call them preparation crisis, because I kind of believe in the collapse of the industrial civilization which we're inhabiting today. But that's for another talk. By the way, Oliver, thank you for that podcast, which I'm talking about. But such crisis, similar to the COVID crisis, that was an eye opener. And I think that if it doesn't really sound like very cocky or something, but we need more of those. We need more challenges to make people realize where the weak points are in their system, in the way they inhabit their home and they live their lives. When you can't afford, for some reason, to load your car with fuel, how do you get to work? Maybe you don't need to work at a place that requires a car. Or there was a crisis here when there was no flour, so there was no bread in the shops for a couple of weeks or something like that. People were desperate. I mean, you can bake bread in your own oven, but you don't realize it before there's no more bread in the shops. So I think that it's not only environmental, but also social pressure or those geopolitical crises which prompt people to think more deeply about how they behave and how they inhabit. And they're very, very important for making us more resilient, not only as individuals, but also as communities and hopefully as a civilization.
Well, and as you said earlier, too, these kind of lower middle income contexts, like people are more resilient, they're more used to solving these problems, but there's still a lot of infrastructure that's been built without that resilience in mind. And so for us, the water system, or for you, the fire at the transformer, are kind of good reminders that you're still very dependent on these large scale infrastructures and how to solve the problem. Is there anything else, a lot of the listeners to the podcast are in the US or Western Europe, they're listening to regenerative skills to do their small little things. When you think about that listener, or you hear other parts of the podcast, what kind of gaps do you hear when you oh, okay, they're solving regenerative practices this way. I could never do it in my context for X, Y, and Z thing. What kind of dissonance are you aware of as you're listening to the podcast?
It's a good question, mainly because I'm not sure how to answer. But one of the, I think, major differences between here and Western Europe, and especially the States, is not so much in the material culture. Of course, there is a huge gap in that, and also the income, but mainly in the attitude of people. And I think that this is one of the hardest things to change, because you can get more money by working more or higher paying job, but the way that people perceive the world, that's maybe the main impediment, and in some way is the main advantage of being here in our part of the world, especially in time of crisis. As an example, I want to say that Americans are very much go get them type of people. They won't stop at anything until they achieve what they their goal is. They set their goal and they just persevere until they reach the goal. While here in Eastern Europe, we have a very rich history of repression, people are more of the it's not possible type of people. Whatever you saying you want to do, you always stopping yourself because you know it's not possible. By anything that can happen wrong, it won't be able to be completed. It won't be able to fulfill the goal which you have set, etc. So it's like a self-reinforcing feedback loop, but in the negative way. And this is the main thing which we are working to offset, like against that mindset. And this is, I think, the main showstopper, if I may say so, to our community, not only the village, but in the country as a whole, being way more regenerative and resilient. Not so much because we don't have the money or the materials, but mainly because we're, as we say here, we're shooting ourselves in the foot before we even start the race. We want to, by doing what we're doing in our garden, in our community, we want to encourage people that it's not as hard as it seems, and it's not unthinkable, impossible, and you don't need the perfect, like magazine cover results in order to have something of a useful yield and something that will fulfill you. And I think this mind work is the hardest part of all, and that's the main obstacle we have to overcome in the coming years. And I think maybe this will be work for our children as well. I mean, the next generation, because it's not an easy way to offset something that's been built up for, like 50 years or more in the time.
Yeah. I think it was kind of funny when we were talking to Margarita, and this is something I'm reflecting on more and more living here in Uruguay. I'm an American, right? And my partner's from Argentina. They're both much more aggressive cultures in terms of pursuing goals, right? Like they're way more active. A lot of Uruguayans are like, oh, but like rural areas in Uruguay are kind of sad or depressing, or we're missing this or missing that. And there's like that preventative mental model. And I think what we're building with our property is more like, hey, yeah, you can do this. It doesn't require that much work. Like we actually have the things here. Here's a solution. And our good friends that are, 6 kilometers away, 4 kilometers away, they also are doing that kind of approach. Like, yeah, you can build it here. It's not that hard. There's ways to do it. It costs a little bit of money to get started, but once you're moving, it's possible. And so I think that
I'm just interrupting you for a moment. I think that such positive but unintrusive examples. I mean, I'm not like actively going door to door. Look what I'm doing. You can have the same garden. You're kind of looking at your own, but still use it as example for people who want to come and see it. As we say, when I was younger, I was trying to, like a metaphor, lean over the fence and start pulling people over the fence to come to my side. Later in my years, I started helping people who are like the fence stragglers sitting on the top of the fence on two sides and wondering which side to fall on. I started helping them fall on my side. And now I'm not even touching those. I'm wanting them to land on my own side on their own, by their own will and desire and, like ambition and goals. And then when they're on my own side, they're already like converted, then I can help them, like guide them by the hand and help them along their journey. But I have, like given up the preacher work, as we say.
Yeah. Oh, well, and that's actually, we're kind of approaching the amount of time we've put aside for this. So I think that's such a good kind of principle to end on. I'm wondering, I have 2 last questions for you. I'm going to be interviewing more people who are operating in the global south or middle income countries who are doing different regenerative practices there. What questions should I be asking them? And kind of what kinds of examples should I be exploring more as I talk to folks?
Right. Well, For me personally, my deepest interest is the community interactions and how people manage to not only live and survive, but also thrive as a group, even if there's not much precision. I mean, each one can live in its own property, in its own life, but still they have something in common that unifies them and gathers them, and they can, the sum of the total is more than the individual parts. This is always the most interesting part to me. The practical stuff, like how do you make a chicken coop out of pallets which you found on the side of the road? This is a really interesting topic to me, but the hard, I'm not really sure why they call them soft skills when you work with people. Well, this is the hardest part in working at all in that direction. It's really weird. But the soft skills, as they call them in English, this is the most interesting part to me. And the examples are the synergies which occur sometimes, they're emergent in properties. Like you don't expect them when you start doing something and they emerge out of the process of collaboration or something else. Sometimes ideas, sometimes a whole new process, sometimes a new community structure or something else. Those emerging properties of the community interaction, those are often the most interesting things. And we already have enough of perfect garden, perfect farm, perfect market garden, perfect pasture operations. We already have enough of that out there in the internet or in the books published, etc. But people working together, the interaction, the problem solving, the when you have conflict resolution, all those aspects are maybe the most important part to me, at least personally, in the regenerative pathway. Because we cannot regenerate anything around us in nature if we cannot make whole the communities which we inhabit. And of course, ourselves in that extension, because, you have to sweep indoors first before you go sweep outdoors. As my baba used to say, my babushka.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful and beautiful vision. Before I close out, do you want to platform anyone or recommend anyone I should talk to?
Well, I can recommend you a family which I know personally. They live off grid, but I'm not sure if they have much or any social media presence. But they are a beautiful family, and I think that it could be a great interview. I can put you in touch with them. They live in a straw bale house which they build themselves off grid, without running water, without mains power of electricity. And they're also a building community on a bigger land base compared to our village. So the experience is very valuable. They also work on a very tight to zero budget. It will be very interesting, I think, for the listeners, if they have any interest in that, material and monetary constraint direction of the podcast.
That would be great. That would be a good follow. Well, it was so great talking to you, Bobby. I'm going to stop the recording.
Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account @regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators, as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, you can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, You can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.